Andres,
Hey
long time
Josh.
no see.
Yeah, long time no see. I hope you won the lottery in between now and then.
Yeah,
Hey Bill, how's it going?
Pretty good. We're currently driving back into Colorado.
Ah, yes, fun. Uh, I remember once in my wife and I we got married in May a handful of years ago, and our honeymoon trip was out to Vail in May. And so it was probably around the same weekend. And we were driving through, and 50 degrees, awesome, beautiful sunny weather, and then about 20 minutes later, whiteout. Snowstorm, just out on some mountain somewhere, and I'm just like clutching. I'm like, oh no. So that's my memory of driving out and about in Colorado, which I'm
That
sure sounds
that's
about right.
about the normal.
Mm-hmm,
Yep.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Karen mentioned to me that she wasn't feeling very well. We actually canceled our 3 o'clock time that we normally meet. Oh, I see we've got, oh, Trevani is hopping in here.
Hi.
So I don't see her on the screen. Hey, how's it going?
I good. I'm not sure what's going on with my camera, but I'm here.
Oh, then you're good. You're good. Sometimes I have it set so I can't see. Zoom has that setting where sometimes it'll make it so that people who don't have their cameras on, I can't see them. So then I don't see you all pop in. But Mindy, nice to see you here as well. Sorry, I'm trying to get all my things set up. Well, I'll worry about it some other time. You don't have to worry about it, Tarani. If
Okay.
it's not working, mine has been weird lately too. So it's
Yeah, I
totally
had a
chill.
Zoom earlier, but now it's just saying failed to start video camera. It's my laptop for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry about that.
It's
That is
okay.
such a pain in the butt. So, as I was saying, and getting a vibe check on who's all here. Karen messaged me a little earlier today to mention that she wasn't feeling very well. So normally when we have back-to-back meetings on these Wednesday afternoons, we actually didn't have our 3 o'clock meeting because she wasn't feeling good, but she told me to be ready for 4 o'clock, that she'd be around, and that we'd still be meeting. So I imagine we're just sort of waiting for her. I don't have a text or anything from her either. And so we will see who drops in. Hey, Ross. I was just
How
telling
you
everyone
doing?
that Karen hasn't been feeling very well. So we're kind of, we canceled the 3 o'clock meeting. And so she said we should be meeting at 4, but I haven't heard from her. So I don't know what the vibe check here is, but we'll
Okay,
give it a little bit.
I've just popped across from Patrick's class, so I imagine he'll pop in a second as well.
Yes, I imagine that that will be true too. So I'm just kind of trying my best to hold down the fort until folks
Andres,
roll in here. Yes,
can I
Karen.
ask a question?
Yeah.
I know last time someone shared I guess the shared folder of the quantitative side of this, but when I tried to click on the link, I didn't have access. So can I just get emailed the manuscripts for review purposes?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I bet we can do that for you.
Thank you.
Let me get.
There's a lot of material.
Yes.
So finding the way to the folder is probably going to be helpful because there's a lot of background and stuff in there.
Mhm.
Yeah, when I tried to click on the link that was put in the chat, it says that I didn't have access because I don't think I'm in that lab class. That's why.
Mhm. No, and that makes sense because yeah, Perry would have set it up a long time ago. So he would be the person
Yeah.
we'd have to nag to get those permissions to change. And I don't know why is this not now? It doesn't even want to work for me. Uh,
Yeah, I emailed Karen, but like I've now hearing the context, that's probably why I haven't heard back from her because I was like, I just want to review the manuscript.
yeah. I'm trying to pull it since we're not doing anything else right now, and I'll just drop it. I'll drop the Word document in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
When I, can get that yanked up. Where is it? MTV, there it is. Oh, that's not the right one. Here it is. Um, it is a lot of different folders. Ross, do you remember off the top of, or Josh or anyone off the top of your head, in which folder the like master manuscript is? I can find like all of the individual parts, but for whatever reason, I'm having a hard time finding whatever draft of it that exists as a full thing. It might actually even be.
You talking about a draft of the entire MTV?
Yeah.
I don't know. There is one. I
Oh,
think it's
there
all
might
still in
not be.
parts.
Yeah, it might still be in parts. Well, that's something anybody else can do, is clobber that together. That way people sort of have a reference. It's not complete by any stretch, but then that way people just have they've read it, they get a sense of what's going on. It's written that well that you can go through. There's not just a discussion, but you can get a general sense of what we're talking about, the methods that were involved, and the results and stuff that were found. So that would be the thing I would look for. Who else do we have on here? Patrick is coming in.
Yeah.
Hey, Patrick.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good. How's it going with you?
Good. Just wrapped up teaching qualitative where
Oh,
Ross was as well, and
yes. Uh,
re-upped my Diet Coke and came here.
that sounds about right. That sounds pretty good. Um, I was letting people know that I got a text from Karen earlier today that she's not feeling very well.
Mm.
So she asked, we normally have a 3 o'clock meeting too. Um, and she wanted to, I thought she was saying that she would come by 4, but now that I'm looking at this text message, I don't think she's coming. Fun fact. So she asked if I could be there at 4, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be there at 4. Why wouldn't I be there? And I think that was an attempt to imply that it's just gonna be us here today. So welcome, folks, to the qualitative study meeting. So again, sort of as I said, clearly we're a little hosh posh. We're a little all over the place, given that Karen is absent today. She said she wasn't feeling well. So I don't totally know how we want to get started, and what we kind of want to do talk about. Tarani raised a really good point for something that anybody who's on the MTV, the quantitative paper, again, anybody could do now. If nobody does it now, I'll do it when we get off of this call and I'll send it around to folks. Cobbling together what we have for a draft that other people could read just sort of as a reference as you all start to brainstorm. We realized, and thanks to Ronnie for pointing this out, all that information is kind of disparate. It's hard to navigate. People can't get into all the folders and things like that. So somebody will cobble together a draft of that that we can send out to people again, just as a quick reference to have, so that we're all kind of operating on the same page, kind of as we continue thinking about things. I will need someone to refresh my memory about what we talked about 2 weeks ago. I was present for the meeting, but I did not participate very much. So my memory is not particularly good, and I was not intending on coming in here and facilitating everything. So I'm just flying by the seat of my pants. I know we talked a lot about different options and, kind of explored different ideas about a lot of the different constructs that are underlying a lot of this. I imagine that's probably where we still are in terms of brainstorming and thinking about different things. But I will kind of open the floor in case anybody else is like, Andrea, stop talking. I know what's up. Let me interject. Your time is now. Gosh dang.
Okay,
I was
so
really hoping.
can I just so I'm just gonna can I snapshot a little bit for my own
Yep.
clarity? So
Mhm.
when we started the original one, it started with a lot of pre-reading, everyone looking for original quantitative pieces about either music or well everything to do with nostalgia, and then mapping them and all of the rest of it. Mapping these are all of the quantitative stuff. This connects here and this connects here, and well-being is over here. There's a cluster of work on well-being and a cluster of work on music and nostalgia and all the rest of it. If we were specifically looking at theme tunes and nostalgia and flipping it into a qualitative space, Patrick,
Mm.
how would you enter that? Because you wouldn't necessarily look at quantitative study, would you? What would you do as you entered that space as a qualitative person instead of going back over all these or would you look at quantitative studies? What would be your entry into it?
I'd say it all depends. You can kind of go about it probably a lot of different ways. It's less important than with a quantitative study to know exactly what has been studied before because you're not going to be building like operationalized variables, like you're not going to be it's going to because it's going to be more open-ended. But I think it is still a good idea to know what kind of the general landscape is. Though some approaches more than others, say grounded theory in particular, asks you to kind of bracket or hold aside those the pre-knowledge that you have from reading the literature. Um, but I still, I think it's useful, especially if, say, you look at all the quantitative studies, and you, after reading it, think, wow, no one has asked about scent or smell in relation to nostalgic. I don't know. I just the first thing that came to my mind. And and then you design a study around that because it's something that hasn't, been represented. There haven't been 20 studies on that topic where they really nail down what's happening. But something that could be more exploratory, um, or it could be there's some finding in the quantitative studies that you think hasn't been explained really well. Maybe something that seems surprising. Why is it that participants seem to report this unexpected thing? And then you could take that and for a qualitative, study, ask people, why do you, when, you're asked on a survey scale, why do you tend to answer this or whatever, and kind of flesh out um, a quantitative finding. You could also say, I'm really interested in this area, but it hasn't really been studied, and so um, I'm going to do almost like a pilot study to explore what kind of things are going on here. really open-ended, and then from that maybe later focus something. But yeah, so what, I mean, I guess maybe a useful question for me would be where is the quantitative study at? What did you guys end up looking at? Do you have results, etc.?
We do have results. Again, I think this points to the need to cobble together a draft for you all to sort of be able to reference. Um, and there are a bunch of different questions that I think sort of percolated from. There's kind of two studies that we sort of did that had different things. We were able to sort of successfully evoke people's sense of nostalgia, and people felt more nostalgic about things they recognized more, but um, they felt more nostalgic. They did also feel nostalgic about things that they didn't necessarily recognize. And I think that that left some open-ended questions, which kind of gets us back to, I think, some of the
Uh,
things I'm remembering from talking about last time. Um, those are the basic things that we sort of figured out. I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head all the results of some of maybe the more sophisticated modeling or correlations of the results or things like that. Um, and so, again, I think that that would be sort of um, the bird's eye view from sort of what we found. We were able to manipulate it. We were able to manipulate it. Um, and again, it was along the lines of sort of what were people sort of familiar with, but it wasn't like people were only nostalgic for things they were familiar with. They could be pretty nostalgic about things they weren't familiar with. And I think that that, again, is where we sort of left that conversation. We couldn't do much more with our data um, to put all those pieces together.
Three of the main things that I think that we can talk about unpacking in a qualitative study that were a part of our quantitative study is the sociality of nostalgia and finding out how people experience nostalgia socially, and how they talk about it. So like Karen wants to do a thematic analysis, so talk about those themes. And so one of the things that initially Ross had said is that, well, what about parasocial connection? And this doing it this way in a qualitative, I think, can parse out, well, are you connected more to people who you used to watch something with or to the actual characters on the show? And when you hear that song, it reminds you of those characters, or does it remind you of someone you used to watch with, or an earlier time, or does it remind you of a time inside an episode of a show? Kind of drill down on those social aspects. Then also like I think we had talked about so like there was an existential element to nostalgia in the sense of like uh well-being, the idea of does it bring me comfort? And so we can actually ask those questions to people and find out their experience of comfort. And then I think the third one was something like self-concept. Does it inform my self-concept? And this really goes back to the heart of what we're doing I think, in the quantitative, because we were saying that nostalgia is typically autobiographical. And so we remember something. So in order for nostalgia to be triggered, it has to be something self-relevant. So getting people to talk about themselves, basically how that music, how those songs are in any way self-relevant for them. What era of time do they go back to in their life, or who they're with, or what event does it conjure, or what have you. But just kind of drill down on those specific areas, I think would be important.
Hmm. Yeah, I go back to it's that to your point, Josh, I go back to that nostalgia is a sort of a reconciliation with the past in the present. This is what happened. This is how I feel about it. I can't go back, but I sense back. That's what I have to, and that gives me generally a sense of well-being, isn't it? It's like, right, I can't go back. Patrick, you mentioned in the last class, I think your grandmother and Star Trek. So that forms an interesting kind of a, are we thinking about her? Are we thinking about Star Trek itself? Did you imagine yourself on the bridge? And when you hear that tune as a little boy, is it like, oh my goodness, I'm on the bridge and I've got my own little, operating keyboard, or which one did I identify with? So that was the kind of space I think that's exactly the sort of space that Josh is, because that represents alternative layers, doesn't it? It's the in home, and then it's also the on screen.
Hmm. And maybe even a third layer of the imagined, like beyond, I don't know. I guess I'm thinking, like you could imagine yourself on the bridge in the show, but also like that's what the future would be like. That they're like, I don't know, that there'd be this even
Mm.
larger imaginative play space. I don't know. But maybe that's more specific to a sci-fi show. Um,
But that
but
is that,
yeah,
yeah, that's it. And then and I think there's another one, which is the actors at the time, because the actors as they are. So I identify with, a young Will Eaton at the time, because I wished I was, when I was that age, I wish I was there, sort of thing. So I kind of, and I follow them and I like what they stand for and they remind me because they're my age or whatever it is. So I think there's a potential kind of link in there. I liked them there, and I've followed them through. So
This
yeah.
is great, and this
Question.
is oh good.
Oh no, I'm sorry. So like if we were to keep it broad, like would the general question just be like how do like theme songs create a sense of connection? And then from the interviews, we decide like what route it takes, like the themes that come out of it? Or are we trying to make the research question very, specific?
Well, I think what we had talked about, I don't know if we landed on this or not, but the idea was to have an interviewee listen to a song, at least one, I think, and then talk about uh, that song in relation to, I think the interview should be somewhat structured to talk about nostalgia and to like to talk about those things that we just were talking about. So I don't think we need to be too broad in the sense of
Gotcha.
like just it's not like free thought necessarily, but just in the realm of nostalgia and specifically like everything that's just been said. This is why like I was going to say like this is great for a qualitative because we've just been guessing at and Sedikides and Wildschut and all these great researchers. No offense to them, we've all just been in the quantitative. We've just kind of been guessing at what triggers nostalgia to ask these questions because we know as media researchers it could be the story, it could be the characters, it could be the people you're with, it could be the events of your life at that time, it could be the events inside of a show, it could be, and so drilling down to see, okay, what exactly is causing you to feel nostalgia, especially about this song, what does a song mean, uh, is a great opportunity because we're always just kind of like guessing at we know it's there, but we're kind of guessing at what they feel nostalgic about.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you.
I think that sort of brings us to a lot of the crux points of sort of I think what we're thinking about and the different options that we have for I think trying to design something that got some of these questions. Um, Obviously, there's a bunch of different ways that one could go about this. There's a bunch of different um, angles and thinking about it. I think last time we talked a lot about, is this something where maybe we try to stimulate people with something, then have them talk about it? Do they bring something to the table? Do we offer something up to them? The quantitative study was us giving them stuff, a list to pick from, and responding to that. And again, that's where we sort of got that thing where, that effect of, people were more nostalgic for the things they were familiar with, but they weren't exclusively nostalgic for the things that they were familiar with. Um, which I think ties back into everything you were just saying, Josh, about the undercurrent of what this is and really what is that experience and how are people sort of understanding it. Um, I also think there's something really interesting qualitatively about, there's this construct, right? This thing, this nostalgia, this emotion that we have, this word we use in our vernacular, and like, what are we describing as psychologists? And maybe where are there gaps? Where does that definition overlap very obviously? Where does it diverge? And how do people sort of make sense of that? Because when people use the word nostalgia, I don't think they mean it as exclusively as maybe we have come to start to operationalize it. And so, there would be, I could almost even imagine asking people about the definition and being like, oh, we're gonna have you listen to the song. Does it make you feel these things? And is there other aspects of this that like that definition is like missing out on? It could be even more pointed, sort of like that. I don't know. Patrick, if people have done something like that with the construct like this before, I think it's kind of unique because it is such a colloquial, universal sort of thing that psychology normally doesn't really have. Normally, we're pretty, um, you know, what we mean is one thing and what people are experiencing is another. But I think there's a little more overlap here. Um, so yeah, I'm also doing my best. I'm cobbling our different drafts together of the different sections. I'm pretty close on that. So like, give me 5 minutes and I will drop a working draft in the chat for you all of the quantitative studies, because I think that that'll be a good thing to kind of take away from this meeting. You all who aren't familiar with the studies can really reflect on that and go through. We don't, it's not complete. Again, you'll notice that there'll be places that'll be like, we need to flesh this out, or this section clearly hasn't been written yet, or there's some factor analyses and things that haven't been written out. But you'll get a general sense, I think, of the basic effects that were going on and basically what we were able to manipulate and what we weren't able to manipulate. And again, you'll see kind of these effects, again, where familiarity really predicted stronger nostalgia, but it wasn't, it didn't solely predict nostalgia. There's other things that are going on as well. So I don't know. Hopefully this sparks another idea from someone that can pick up on it as I finish this, putting this draft together.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of kind of asking qualitatively about the construct, and then I would say, it might be useful to the way I would maybe design the study to ask the participants, I, like, tell me about a time when you experienced nostalgia, or ask for a rich description of nostalgia linked to like a specific experience. Or like tell us about when you have felt nostalgic for your favorite TV show or something, to get the kind of raw experience near, not psychology influenced description of it. And then after getting that kind of more raw, unformulated folk definition, or for first, actually, I've tried to get the rich description of the experience, and then you could ask, if you had to put in your own words, like, what does nostalgia mean? And then last, if you want, you could ask, does it include this? Does it include that? Is there anything missing? And and compare it more directly to the way the literature has defined it,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
So I've just done a quick, so I've just done a quick inquiry in chat about about existing qualitative research in this space, which was not something that we pulled up the first time round. How richly would we dig into that without the risk of it coloring what we're about to do? Or do we really need that as a basis like we do with quant?
I would say you don't need it as much of a basis, but it is good to make sure you're not like exactly duplicating what someone else has done. That's always my fear, that some other person had the same thought and did it 5 years ago, and they're
Yeah.
gonna be like, what's this? Um, so I think a cursory look at least, the titles and abstracts of qualitative studies that mention nostalgia would be useful. Also, I mean, interestingly, there's in the qualitative kind of space, there might be almost more um, non-psychology studies. Like, I think, there might be more stuff in media studies or anthropology or sociology, even, especially when it comes to like qualitative looks at nostalgia.
There's some yeah, so there's some Josh, there's one for you here, contemporary afterlives of serial dramas. So new viewers and old programs, which is an interesting, so rewatching, like rebroadcast shows for new viewers, which is an interesting space. And then there was another one. So there are a couple which there's collective memory, which I think is there. None of them, to be fair, appear to dig into the music trigger. Um, they do, one of them here, does look a little bit at all of these other contextual things, the space of doing it, but that's the environment of viewing. But there's a little bit here. Why don't I take it as an exercise to pull some, and we'll start a new, maybe add it to a separate Zotero just for reference. And just so that we've got some references of what others have done, to your point, and just so that we don't land on somebody else's turf.
I know that I think her name is Christine Thor. I've used cited her work, and Karen has cited her work. She did a uh, at least one, maybe two qualitative studies on rewatching slash nostalgia. I'm trying to look it up. It might be that Karen read them because the only ones I can find are in French because she's French Canadian. I'm going to try to find a version in English, but she had some great insights on rewatching or excuse me, about nostalgia from her qualitative studies.
I, in the chat, was able to drop a copy of the latest versions of each of the manuscript of each of the sections that people have been working on. Again, you'll see there are tons of comments. There are tons of, we need to finish this and do that. But again, this should just at least get everybody on the same page in terms of um, jumping off from what we found and how we did it. And again, that might open up some opportunities to kind of think about again what those sets of studies were able to kind of do and not do, and maybe where this qualitative study kind of intersects. Um, and yeah, Josh, I think you also bring up a good point about some of the studies that we had looked at before, sort of as inspiration. Um, Certainly, a lot of that was outside of psychology. I can also to Patrick's point, and so thinking about yeah, is there any I can't imagine we're the first people to try to do qualitative inquiry on this idea of nostalgia. So, what have people done before? How have they asked questions? Um, and where does that sort of intersect with how this team had already sort of conceptualized this before? I think in there will be a gap that becomes pretty obvious about, how do we extend this and how do we um, think about what does the what does qualitative methodology, um, what does it offer us in terms of what it can give insight into and what it can extend based on maybe what we were able to find in this draft in this paper. Yes, I can do that. Boom. Sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just went to Google Scholar and put in qualitative research on nostalgia, and it pulled up, I had not been thinking about this, a bunch of stuff in more like marketing, um, like in the Journal of Consumer Behavior, qualitative market research, advancers in consumer research, things like that.
Yeah, so I actually I mentioned this to Josh, but I probably will end up sending it to the whole crew. Um, Kind of on that example of where have other people talked about this before? Um, the marketing and I think like media studies people in general have probably talked about this the most. I just listened to this interview with these authors of this text. They're media scholars people, and they were really talking about nostalgia in reference to reboots and remakes, as well as rewatching. That's initially kind of was like, oh, we do some stuff on this, and they really attacked it from a critical kind of media scholarship lens, where they were kind of saying the marketing kind of made me think of this, Patrick. We
Hmm.
see this pivot to remakes and reboots and expanding pre-established IPs, um, at the same time that we see this like massive market consolidation of media creation sort of in general.
Yeah.
And there's like a risk aversion within these dynamics where, oh, Netflix knows and they have the data. This is one of the things that really kind of got into this. Well, people are rewatching Friends and Star Trek and The Office way more, like infinitely more, than they're consuming the new content, right? That Netflix makes. Now there's licensing issues and things like that. Netflix has had to kind of pivot their business model to try to produce more original content. But there's an aversion there, right? And there's like a fight over these resources. Or we think about the fights of cable television, right? The syndication fights over who gets the rights to air these the reruns or don't, because they know that that is where they're going to get a majority of people's attention, particularly outside of prime time sort of slots. So again, I think that that's probably a really good place to go, especially as we start to um, really try to bridge that gap between how have people talked about this construct, particularly in industry, in research, and like what is like the lived experience of people like consuming things and reflecting on
Yeah.
things. Because it's probably not a one for one sort of thing. I'm not sure where on that kind of balance beam my thoughts really sit, but anyways, so there's definitely some interesting scholarship that's going on in some of these areas that sort of touch on this. And again, I imagine the marketing people, I mean, they know this to some degree. That's why Disney spends $4 million to buy Star Wars, right? They don't do that because they thought that that was cool. They did that because they knew that nostalgia sells to some degree. And yeah, there might be some insight there. And maybe that's another angle of the qualitative lens of sort of the nostalgia, asking people about like its commercialization and how does that impact the way that you view it or feel it? Does it even matter at any point? Does Gilmore Girls reboot coming around the corner? Does that evoke or like harm a sense of nostalgia towards the show in some sort of sense or something like that? There might be some interesting questions kind of around that as well.
I picked up something you said about aversion, made me think it's kind of risk averse for both the networks or the streaming services and the consumer of the media.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not taking the risk on like is this new episode of Euphoria gonna like what gross me out or whatever. Um or also like if you're the streaming service, you know that people like this.
Mm-hmm.
Um and then it made me think because one of the articles that did pop up was about the role of nostalgia. So psychologists interviewed like resistance fighters in Ukraine and the role of nostalgia in sustaining resistance to the Russian invasion,
Mm-hmm.
nostalgia for past Ukraine, which then also made me think of kind of like Make America Great Again. And in some ways, nostalgia, if you're thinking of an imagined, real or imagined past, is in some ways, especially if you're, I guess, aiming to kind of return there, kind of conservative in the literal sense um, thing. Um, Although, now, yeah, conservative as in hewing to the past, not necessarily just.
That I think a great example of what you're talking about that is the Taylor Sheridan stuff, which is the
Ah,
landman stuff, which is it's not
yeah.
we're cleaving back to the that whole traditional values where the far, the oil men and all of the rest of it were the heart of America. Now, in the background, there's a whole lot of other traditional values that go with it, but we want to, and it's hugely kind of popular. We're not going back to Dallas, but we're reimagining a time when people appreciated how that worked. And it's hugely, it's let's be fair, it's been hugely mass market popular. And you'd have to say there is a nostalgia thing. From the inside, I think there's this kind of weird intuitive kind of value that creators and commissioners put on nostalgia, which is it's an amplifier factor. So it's like we've got this story. If it's nostalgia, we can amplify, and by amplify I mean we can attract a 20% more audience if it's got a nostalgic angle than if it's just a brand new angle. So we could do a retro show that no one's ever told before, but if it's got a nostalgic angle, then we can almost guarantee a 20% better return in viewing. So we might consider something for me like Wednesday, which is based on the old Adams thing. That whole, right. So the new viewers that seeing it because my niece loves it because she loves Jenna Ortega and all of the rest of it. So she's seeing it for the first time. But then for people who grew up with it, it's like, okay, how well does this fit with my concept? Am I happy with this evolution of atoms, the atoms world? Does it take me back, but in a good way? There's an interesting reconciliation there of I like it, or I suddenly feel old because she's so young, or whatever it is. So that's an interesting thing, right? So they're clearly buying into the old IP. They're clearly digging into it because it has some value. They could have created another family like the Munsters did. Or but they chose to go to the Adams because they believed there was value in the Adams mythology or that whole thing, right?
Yeah. And my
So that
mom and
you
I
have,
wouldn't have watched it if it was Munsters, not Adam Rent, right? Like,
Exactly.
yeah,
yeah,
right.
yeah,
So there is this. So there's a value to that nostalgia, and there's probably an interesting conversation to be had between maybe even I don't know. It'd be interesting to get family members, younger ones who'd never seen the Adams, and the older ones who did, and see, how are we both perceiving the show? Is this a shared thing? Am I getting something different out of it because I want to see the reimagined Wednesday? Because she wasn't really the hero of the original show. She was a great character. So, I mean, I think there's some interesting, because then you're digging into how people experience nostalgia in a shared. Anyway, I don't know. I'm
Yeah. And I think
so.
to tie it back to music, it would be really interesting. I don't know about Wednesday. I've never seen Adam's Family or Wednesday, so I don't know. But my question would be, does Wednesday use the same theme? Does it use the same sting? Again, I think about the one I can't think about is Star Wars, right? It does use the same music. It uses the exact same music cues. It uses the exact same right instrumental moments and things like that to try to. That is sort of in a sense because like the special effects are better, the cinematography is better, the right nothing aesthetically, the costume designs and stuff are totally different. Nothing aesthetically or mechanically about Disney Star Wars and George Lucas 1977 Star Wars is the same, except for the characters, the story, and the music. That is like the one thing that carries over. And so, what is that attempt? What does that appeal? Other shows, I don't know if Wednesday does or doesn't attempt essentially the same thing. So clearly there's something there where the creators, that's a conscious decision that they didn't rewrite the Star Wars theme and that they're going to hit you with the music and they're going to hit you with the horns and the title scroll. Like they do that very intentionally for a reason to try to, I think, unify new and old and create a shared right like this is what like Star Wars is, and the music in that particular case is the thing that does it. Or Star Trek would be another good example. It's always doesn't matter if it's Next Generation, it doesn't matter if it's Deep Space Nine, it doesn't matter if it's the animated show that's on Paramount Plus right now. It's like you get hit with that music sting at the beginning of it every single time to try to put you in a place in a sense. And it would be interesting to ask people who maybe only consumed the new stuff, who only consumed the old stuff, who consume both. Like, how do they view the music? How do they view the use of the music to try to unify? I think an IP over of really decades and decades of time. And does that evoke a sense of nostalgia, sort of on its own? Do kids who watch Wednesday now do they do it because it's going to evoke some sense of nostalgia out of them regarding Adam's Family and a TV show that they weren't alive for, or um, is that simply an appeal to try to bring older generations into the new thing? That'd be one of the interesting sort of sidebars, I think.
There's some great footage around about those music stings because in Star Wars, individual characters had their own individual motifs,
Mm-hmm.
and there's great vision of you know fans watching the new shows as they come up, and the introduction or the reintroduction of an existing character, and the music, literally grown men bursting into tears because that music motif signals that the character is coming. And so we haven't seen the character, so the character is returning, but the music motif is like, oh my God, it's his theme. He's coming, and these men who you assume are probably otherwise quite stoic outside suddenly flooded with tears because it's a childhood character for them is returning to the screen.
This underlies, I think, a foundational thing about nostalgia is that it is it harkens to it tends to be a halcyon view of the past, whether or not it's true or not. Nostalgia may be deceptive in that way, in the sense of like, for example, Make America Great Again. Well, great for who? So you're looking back, but depending on the perspective of the individual, it may not be as good as you think. But nostalgia tends to take whatever it is you're nostalgic about and puts it in a positive light because again, home or safety and self-referentiality, you feel like yourself and you feel like you're home or safe, what have you. So I think a good foundational question, like Patrick was asking, like to get the ball rolling, so to speak, when you say, okay, ask them like, hey, what do you think nostalgia is? Or talk about a show or what have you that you felt nostalgic about is in their response, when we look at their response, are the themes they mentioned positive? So that'll match up. It'll be a positive thing. It'll be something good, uh, and uh, potentially adaptive, but at the very least, they'll talk positively about whatever it is that they're nostalgic about because it tends to be positive. Yet even in the quantitative, we were like, well, there's this bittersweet part. There's a little bit bitter always to it, but usually the sweetness tends to overshadow their bitterness with nostalgia. And just like Ross, you were saying, people were crying at the music of it, remembering, just and music itself can be emotional too. But just it tends to elicit more positive than negative emotions and very powerful emotions.
I think your question of who, you know, better for who, I think there's then for me, there's kind of in a way, I understand what you're saying, but I also think that in some levels we were all more innocent at the time. So for all of us, it was better. There was no death and taxes, and we hadn't had a whole lot of life experiences, which have made us more kind of like, I suppose, taken a lot of the edges off the innocence of our emotions. And so for almost all of us, childhood is, a little bit better. It was better because it was freer and we had, so I wonder whether that's just something we can never recreate and we have to
It
factor
was
that
only
in.
better because of our perspective. It wasn't better because it was better. Yeah,
No,
that's
no,
what I'm
no.
saying.
It
It was
was
better
better
Right.
because of our
because,
perspective.
yeah, because
It's
we
also
Uh,
like
didn't
there's a
know, we
phenomenon
never,
in like nightlife and music where if you ask different people when the best period to go clubbing was, it was
mm,
always in their 20s. Whenever they
yeah,
were in their 20s, like yeah.
that, yeah.
going back to music itself, we've said so. Like Rutledge has wrote about how it's written about how music, in particular, nostalgic. We tend to be more nostalgic about music that we encountered in our late teens and early 20s.
Mm.
Not that we can't be nostalgic about other kinds of music, but we tend to in emerging adulthood. And so again, there are still problems in the world. We still had problems, but then st looking the nostalgia is not a 2020 view backward. Is like it's always seems less complicated and um, less problems, and everything was easier, or we were more, were more, we felt more like ourselves, and we had we were in some sort of place of safety that we were remembering back to, whether or not it was like that for everybody, and whatever, but it's all individual. It's all our perspective at the time.
Um, that brings me to another thing that Patrick said a little bit ago. This idea of the motivation to like look back. I think people are also probably in like the risk aversion. I think about if I'm overworked and underpaid, and there's all this kind of social, political nonsense. Maybe it's worse or not than in the past, but we're just more hyper aware of it for sure. And all that stress is sort of eating at me. Sort of, what is the investment of picking up something new, right? What is that cost benefit analysis versus um, being able to be transported back, somewhere else or to a time that felt more comfortable or felt more safe, or when you were able to engage with media kind of with some, blinders on again. And so maybe there's something accessible there that makes turning your brain off, right? And enjoying the content easier to do than it would be to pick up a new show like Euphoria or something like that, where you're going to be sort of challenged to be like, do I like this? Do I not? Do I understand it? I have to remember these characters and their plots and their stories. And none of us have enough time in the day to remember our own like life narratives, right? And so that's a really difficult thing to sort of ask from people. Um, and so again, I think we're all sort of hinting at this thing about how does this um, what is kind of the cognition that's taking place? And I think music is a really great place to sort of isolate some of these things and to try to see, you know, how does that transport, or how does that prime, or how does that um, evoke, right, these sensations or these feelings. Probably can't do all of it at once, though. So that's sort of where I kind of leave people to think a little bit more materially about sort of what sticks out here, or maybe what feels like the biggest need to be answered as we sort of uncover some of these questions again, doing some more literature review. Remember to take that literature review outside of psychology. And for the folks who weren't familiar with the MTV study, to kind of peruse that, and for us to get your thoughts and feedback there. There's probably the answer in that, in terms of like what sort of things can we do where we could sit people down and ask them some stuff about this that would help us understand this more intimately going forward, sort of as we build psychological theory around these ideas.
Hmm.
Yeah, that idea of innocence. That's kind of what I was thinking about. Like when I was 10 and my dad took me to see Attack of the Clones, like there's not like a social political, it is a social political film, but like I can't, I'm not even old enough to like comprehend it at that level. It has to mean something different. And so for me to watch Star Wars now, again, there's some social political commentary going on, of course. It's easy to relate it back to our current time. I'm the kind of person that's always going to do that with any media I consume, but is there something easier there? Is there something that taps me back to a sense of self where before I was an adult and all these life stressors, right, really kicked in and took over? Um, and yeah, what is that like feeling, right? And how do we sort of capture that? But again, I think these would be the questions that we would ask people. And again, maybe the marketing, the marketing folks have done this. Again, I can't imagine that. I mean, given the state of the industries, that they're blind to this. Again, they're utilizing it very heavily. And so clearly they know that people are motivated by that to some degree. I think the question for us as psychologists, I think the marketing and the media studies people, okay, people are motivated by nostalgia to consume certain things and to pay attention to certain things. But then for us as psychologists, like what is the cognition there? Like what is the psychological foundations of that motivation? I think that that's really sort of the core, if I'm hearing everybody correctly, of sort of the questions that we're asking. Cool. Well, we're at the top of the hour. I always love these meetings and these conversations. Sorry that, again, Karen wasn't able to drop by and that I was kind of figuring out what the sitch was and navigating that. But I think we had a pretty productive discussion. So we'll meet. We're meeting every other week. So in 2 weeks. And obviously, you know where to find me and Karen and Patrick in the meantime with any questions or ideas or anything like that. Patrick, likewise, if you ever want to chat things over, run by ideas, you know where to find me and Karen. And I think for folks who want to read through the MTV rough draft, get a sense of what we did and how we did it and what we found, that's in there. It's a little messy, but it is in there for you to read. And again, get a little bit of a sense for how we operationalize things and conceptualize them. And then hopefully when we touch base next time, all of us will come together maybe with a little bit of a better sense of, okay, here's what we were able to do and not able to do. Also, folks, again, I encourage you to do some cursory literature reviews, start poking around in different papers and different studies and different disciplines, how they measured and looked at this, ask people questions about this. And then hopefully when we come together next time, we can start to identify some gaps and hopefully figure out what makes the most sense in terms of the kinds of things that we'd hope to get out of the study that we're getting. And then from there, I think a design will start to fall into place. Cool. All right. We'll get out of here. Thanks again for your time and effort and thoughts. Again, just let me know if there's anything else I can be helpful with. I can send people a copy of that draft via email if that's going to be easier. Just reach out to me and I can do that. And otherwise, I will see you all around the block because I will see you all in different places between now and next week. Yes.
Do you have 1 minute, Andreas, to talk
Yes.
about dissertation students
I can
after the
definitely
pool?
do that, Patrick. So I'm going to boot everybody else out of here so that you and me can do that. Get out of here, folks. See you later.
Ciao. See you all.
And